Okay, let's begin. Good morning, everyone. It is always a great day to learn geography. Welcome to grade 12 geography on the topic of sediments, part 2. Please feel free to use our question and answer tab or our chat tab today to ask any questions and also to respond to questions that will be given throughout this PowerPoint presentation. Today, our subtopic will be sediment functions and sediment shapes. The objective for our lesson today include, firstly, we wish for you to be able to identify and describe sediment shapes. Next, you should be able to give examples of sediment functions. And lastly, you will also be able to categorize sediments based on their various functions. So for all of you who were part of the lesson yesterday, let's do a quick review. You can share all of your answers in our chat. We're going to go through each one, question by question. First question. What is a sediment? Yesterday in part 1, we discussed what a sediment was. We were also able to watch a few videos that also aid us in this definition. Can you please share for me in the chat, what is a sediment? Okay. Let's continue. So a settlement is simply a place where people live. Question number 2. I want you to identify the 2 types of sediment that we looked at yesterday. The 2 types of sediment. This is the broad umbrella on which other sediments actually fall under. If you know the answer, please feel free to share. What are the 2 types of sediment? Okay, Anthony, excellent. Anthony said rural and urban sediments. Excellent, good job, Anthony. Question 3. There were about 4 criteria that was mentioned yesterday in our previous lesson. These criteria are used to group sediments. Do you know what they are? Please feel free to share. What are the 4 criteria that we group sediments by? If you know one, you can share one as well. Does anyone remember? How are sediments grouped? Okay, I'm getting some answers in the chat. Someone said city. No, Indira, city wasn't one of them. Someone said countryside. Someone said by size. Franklin said by size. Okay. By shape. Okay, good job, Indira. Shape is definitely one of them. Size is also one. Size will come under our rank. So thank you, Franklin. Oh, yes, Marshall. Function. Yes, function is one of them. Okay. There's, yes, Anthony, and you scored the last one that I was waiting for. Location is the last one. So let's quickly go over those ways in which we can group a sediment. So the 4 ways in which sediments can be grouped. 1 is by the location. Remember, we looked at location yesterday, and location focus on our site and our situation. Okay, site being where sediment is located, and your situation is where sediment is located based on its surrounding features. Okay, The second one was definitely rank. Rank was another one we looked at yesterday. Okay, and there are two ways in which we are able to rank a settlement, either by size or either by their services. The other one was function. Function. So one way was location. The second one was rank. The third was function. And the last was shape. Good job for those of you who got it right. Pat yourself on the back. So question number 4. What is the name that describes the point at which a settlement is located? What describes where a settlement is located? Excellent, Anthony. Anthony, you're on a roll today. Good job. Yes. So where a settlement is located, that is what we call our site. Okay, good job. So let's continue with our last question. Using the two photos below, I want you to be able to tell me which category would each photo fall under. Which category of settlement will each photo fall under? Photo 1 and photo 2. Please provide your answers. Yes, Franklin. Good job. Franklin was the first one to got the answer. Photo 1 is urban and photo 2 is our rural settlements. Remember yesterday we spoke about our rural and urban settlements. And one thing we said about our rural and urban settlements, firstly, is that our urban settlement is our towns and our cities. So these will be our much larger settlement areas. Our rural settlement will be those of the countryside. So if you weren't here with us yesterday, the two different types of settlement is rural and urban. One being countryside, which is photo number 2, and photo number 1 is definitely showing our urban areas. Good job, guys. Let's continue. So I'm going to give you some small clues. This is something else that we looked at yesterday as well. And we're going to be able to label the settlement hierarchy according to size. Remember what we discussed yesterday? We talked about how the settlement hierarchy at the base, which is at the bottom, starts from our smallest settlement going up to our largest settlement. So as I give you a clue, I want you to tell me what settlement that we are describing. So this settlement is found at the base of our settlement hierarchy. This settlement is so small that possibly there won't be any services provided. Which settlement is found at the base of this structure? Franklin says the village. No, Franklin, not at our base. Marsha says the hamlet. Good job, Marsha. It is the hamlet. Yes, Franklin, it is the hamlet. Good job. Indira also says hamlet. Yes. So the hamlet is our settlement that is found to the bottom of our structure. So let's continue. So above the hamlet, I think we had a little error there just now. That answer was not hamlet. Let's try the question one more time. The answer wasn't hamlet, but I put hamlet in its place. Using the other settlements that are there. Okay, let's look at the settlements that we have there. Which one would be at our base? No, it's not the village. No, Indira, it's not the village. No, Franklin, it's not the village. No, it's not the city. Okay, this is a very small settlement. Yes, Anthony, good job. That is what I was looking for, isolated buildings. Isolated buildings. Okay, let's move on above our hamlet. So this settlement is a little bit bigger than our hamlet. It provides a few more services than our hamlet is actually able to give us. Okay, we'll find things such as maybe a small gas station, maybe a village shop. So which settlement do you think? Yes, Franklin. Yes, Anthony. The answer is village. So as we continue to build up our settlement hierarchical structure, I'm going to give you another clue. Okay, so number 4. So there are 2 of these. Okay, one can be found in your urban area. One can be found in your rural area. This one is responsible for market towns. Which settlement type are we referring to? Yes, Indira, small town. Yes, Anthony, small town. It is. And of course, if we know we have small town there, what will follow? Definitely our larger town. And remember the difference between your small town and your larger town. Your small town focuses more on your primary industries, your farming, your fishing, your mining, okay? Whereas your large town focuses more on the manufacturing of those primary industries, okay? The industrialization, okay? So following your large town, this area is where you can find, this area is what we will consider the area of Nassau or the area of Freeport. What will we call the area of Nassau? What type of settlement would the area of Nassau be or the area of Freeport be? What type of settlement will they be considered? Okay, Franklin says city. Someone is an anonymous, says capital. Let's see what the chat says. Brittany says city. Yes, so Brittany and Franklin, you are correct. The answer is city. Okay, so we have 2 types of settlement remaining. Which one will be the one that is going to sit at the peak because it's going to be considered the largest of the 2? Which one would sit at the actual peak? Okay, Indira says the capital. My anonymous attendee says the capital. Okay, Will, I see you. You also says the capital. Marsha says conurbation. Okay, so for all of you who said the capital city, you are correct. Okay, and of course, last but not least, our conurbation city will sit at the second going down. So one last question before we leave. Settlements such as numerous isolated buildings, hamlets, village, small town. What are those 4 settlement types? Which umbrella will they fall under? Your numerous isolated buildings, your hamlet, your village, and your small town. Which category of settlement will they fall under? Yes, Marsha, good job. Rural settlements. Okay, so our sediment hierarchy structure according to size starts from your smallest sediment, meaning that the population of that sediment is very small, and it goes, as it goes up to the top, your sediment size or your sediment population is actually going to increase. This sediment hierarchy structure is separated into your rural sediments at the base. So the first 4 sediments would be considered your rural sediments. And starting from your large town, your city, your conurbation, and your primate city, those would be considered your urban areas. So one thing I want you to remember is each one of these sediments going up is bigger than the other. You can also refer to our PowerPoint presentation on yesterday's lesson. Now let's continue. Good job, everyone. Excellent participation. So yesterday, this is one of our first questions that we looked at. Yesterday, we spoke about our sediment criteria. And what actually is a sediment criteria? These are the 4 different ways in which sediments are actually grouped. Okay? So yesterday, we looked at 2 of these. Yesterday, we were able to look at location and we were able to look at rank. Today, in our lesson, we're going to focus on the remaining 2, your sediment shapes and your function or the major use of a sediment. Let's continue. Okay, so some key things are important when we are discussing the sediment patterns. These are some of the things that geographers actually pay attention to. Okay, so some things that geographers want to actually acknowledge when it comes to sediment patterns. They want to be able to identify the different shape in which a sediment actually have. Okay, another thing they want to be able to identify is what purpose does that sediment actually serve. So that would be considered your main function. So these 2 different criteria we're going to look at today, your main function of your sediment and the shape of that sediment as well. Okay, so we looked at what is a site, what is a situation. These 2, as it reflects on your location, is very important when we are looking at your sediment patterns. How big is your sediment? How small is your sediment? When we look at situation, do we have a mountain blocking the sediment from actually expanding? Is there a river that's running through the sediment that's going to block expansion of that sediment as well? How is this going to, some things I want you to think about is how are the different situations going to affect a sediment size and a sediment shape? Okay, so let's continue. So when you think about your sediment patterns, this is referring to the way in which the buildings of that sediment is actually arranged, okay? And we're going to see some of those as we move forward. So let me just reiterate that. So when you're thinking about your sediment patterns, you're thinking about the actual shape of the sediment. And what gives the sediment its shape? The buildings. Okay, the buildings give the sediment a shape based on how those buildings are actually arranged. What buildings are we talking about? We're talking about houses. We're talking about shops. We're talking about any building that is actually, any structure that is actually built in that given sediment. Okay, so we have 3 main types of sediment patterns. 3 main types of sediment patterns. 1, we have our dispersed sediment patterns. Please pay attention to the little structures that you also see next to each one of these sediment patterns. 2, we have our nucleated sediment. Okay. 3, we have our linear sediment. Question. Using the photo, which type of sediment do you think this is? Which type of sediment do you think this is? Please share your answers. Remember, we discussed some of the different types of sediment prior. I don't want the sediment pattern, I want the type of sediment that you think it is, the actual sediment type. What do you think it is? Do you think it's a rural sediment? Do you think it's an urban sediment? Someone said urban. No, Will, it's not an urban. Yes, definitely a rural sediment. Okay, this is definitely a rural sediment. How can we tell? Remember what we said about rural sediments. Okay, rural sediments are those sediments that refer to those that look like a countryside sediment. If you've never seen a countryside sediment, maybe you want to reflect on our family islands. Okay, those are actually rural sediments. Okay, you also have different sediments on the island of New Providence, on the island of Grand Bahama, that are also considered to be rural sediments as well. Okay, good job, guys. Great participation. So let's continue looking at the different sediment patterns. So our first sediment pattern, this one is called your isolated or your dispersed. It's also called a scattered sediment pattern. And we can almost decipher why this is called that. When you look at the way the buildings are structured, they're not closely together. They're very separated over a farmland area. So this type of sediment pattern is actually found around farm areas. So one of the main services of this type of sediment pattern would definitely be farming. Okay, such sediments are located in isolated areas, possibly around hillsides or agricultural environments. Okay, secondly, nucleated or clustered sediment patterns. So this is the second sediment pattern. So let's analyze the shape of this sediment pattern before we move on. Okay, so it's a little bit different, definitely, from our previous slide. Whereas in your previous slide, you were able to see how many buildings? We had about 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 buildings that are separated all over that farmland area. Here, you are able to see numerous amounts of buildings, okay? And these buildings are actually more closely knitted, or as it is stated in our title, more clustered. So these ones are more clustered together compared to our previous sediment pattern. And in this cluster, you are actually able to see the way the different road patterns actually move throughout this sediment pattern. Okay, so this sediment type, this sediment pattern, pardon me, this is also a rural sediment, and in previous years, they actually would cluster sediments together for protection purposes as a defense mechanism. Okay, they kept everyone closely together, so in case of attacks, persons wouldn't have to come from too far to actually assist in the defense. Okay, another purpose for these type of sediments would definitely social and economic. In these type of sediment patterns, if you remember what we discussed yesterday, as it relates to your sphere of influence, you won't have to travel a long distance to get services that are necessary for your survival. So right there in that sediment, you will have everything that inhabitants actually need to survive, okay? So when you think about your nucleated sediments, these ones are definitely more in a cluster. Your linear or elongated sediment pattern. Anyone ever been to the family islands? Is anyone in here from a family island? If you're from a family island, please share with us which family island you're from. Okay, a lot of our family islands are shaped or have this elongated sediment pattern shape. Okay, this type of sediment pattern flows along a roadway or a river, or as it relates to the Bahamas, it will flow along the ocean. Okay, so we can actually see why it's called elongated or linear. Look at how the buildings on this sediment pattern are actually structured along this roadway. Much different from our prior sediment pattern, which are more in the clusters. You see how the houses and the buildings are in the clusters? So the difference is this sediment pattern moves along a line, okay? Usually along a road, a river, or even the ocean itself, some coastal area. Okay, so the first three sediment patterns that we looked at, our linear, our nucleated, and our isolated. These three are predominantly found in our rural sediments. Okay, they are predominantly found in our rural sediments. We also have different types of sediment patterns as well, which are typically found in our urban areas as well. Okay, some of them include your cross-shaped patterns. You could almost imagine what a cross-shaped pattern would look like. Okay, when you think about a cross, okay, your T-shape sediment pattern, you have them that look like Y-shape. Okay, you have ones that look like star-shape, and you also have those shaped as a rectangular. Okay, remember when we talked about sediment patterns, we're talking about how the sediment is actually laid out, how the buildings are actually arranged along the roadways. So these are some different types of sediment patterns as well that you will typically see in an urban area. Now, don't get me wrong, the previous three are also found in urban areas as well. But as sediments actually develop in size, their sediment patterns are possibly able to change. Okay, so our three main types of sediment patterns, as discussed, is our nucleated sediments, where you have your buildings are more clustered together. You have your linear sediments that follow some roadway, a river, or even a coastal environment. And also your dispersed sediments, which are those buildings that are scattered over a farmland area. Okay, so now let's identify these sediment patterns based on the three main sediment patterns that we discussed. Let's identify these three sediment patterns. So in the chat, I want you to tell me which sediment pattern would this photo be? Okay, I see someone in the chat. Someone says nucleated. Brittany says nucleated. Marsha says nucleated. Will says nucleated. Anyone else would like to guess? Okay, Nathan says clustered. Franklin says nucleated. Okay, so yes, I see some people asking some other questions. Nathan and Indira, I will get right back to you. Okay, so yeah, so everyone that says nucleated or cluster, please give yourself a tap on the back. That is definitely a nucleated sediment pattern. Okay, our second photo. This type of sediment pattern can be found along a roadway, maybe a river, or even a coastal environment. Which sediment pattern is this? Okay, Marsha says linear, Anthony says linear, Raven says linear, Brittany says linear, Will says linear, Bernardo says linear. Franklin says linear. Nathan says linear. Excellent, guys. That is definitely a linear settlement pattern. Okay. Last but not least, despite small in size, we have not forgotten it. So this type of settlement pattern is found in farmland areas. Marsha says isolated. Raven says disperse. Anthony says disperse. Will says isolated. Brittany says isolated. Franklin says isolated. Bernardo says isolated. Someone says that's a scary pattern. I think he means scattered. Again, dear, I see your answer as well. So yes, good job, guys. This is definitely your scattered or your dispersed settlement pattern. Remember, it's a large farmland area with possibly very few buildings, okay? Okay, so Indira asks, why are they shaped like that and how can we tell? So you can typically tell based on the way in which the buildings are actually arranged on the, in the different settlements, okay? You can also tell by the road pattern. So like you saw with the linear, you saw how those buildings were actually along the roadway. They weren't in the back. They all just followed the roadway. And like I said, some of these examples can be found on our family islands. Okay, so the way in which the buildings are actually arranged will be able to assist you, and the roadway itself can also assist you. Okay, Nathan asks, is that really the reason they're close together? Based on what our studies have suggested, Nathan, yes, they stayed close together for defense purposes. They also stayed close together for economic and social reasons as well. I don't know if you were in the lesson yesterday when we looked at the different services that a settlement actually provides and the reasons persons would prefer to have settlements close to them in a particular settlement versus to the distance in which they are actually willing to drive, which is your range, the distance they are willing to drive to actually get a particular service. So having them close together actually allows for you to be able to supply your population with services that they actually need. So defense would have been one. We're talking about the nucleated settlement, guys, for those of you who are not sure what when we're referring to. So dispersed, so the nucleated settlement, they were close together because of defense, social, and economic reasons. Okay? So basically they're lazy. Not lazy, Nathan. They like convenience, don't you? We all like convenience. We try to avoid having to travel a longer distance if not necessary. So let's continue, guys. So just now we looked at our settlement shapes. Okay, settlement shape refers to the pattern of the settlement, how they're actually formed along their building arrangement or roadways. So now we're going to look at our last criteria, which also helps to group settlements, and that is the function of a settlement. So we see these two words keep coming back to us as we continue to discuss the different settlements, and those are rural and urban. So remember, rural, countryside, urban are your cities and your towns. These ones are more advanced, okay? So because rural areas, they are not as advanced or not advanced at all in some cases as our urban areas, these ones are going to have single functions, okay? Single function. These functions are typically those of your primary areas. Remember, in a lot of those rural areas that we looked at, those are, you see a lot of farmland, okay? So some of those primary activities that you're going to see happening in your rural areas have anyone ever done industries before? So we can look at some of the different industries that you can find in your rural areas. You can find farming, you can find fishing, you can find miming, okay? So those are some of the different primary activities that you will actually find happening in your rural areas. Remember, in your rural areas, these are your areas that deal with raw materials, okay? They don't have the advancement to manufacture or process these raw materials, okay? But then when you look at your urban areas, these areas are more advanced. So these areas were where you see a lot of your manufacturing and processing and your industrialization actually happening. Therefore, these areas will serve they'll be served multi-purposes. Okay, so therefore they'll be considered your multifunctional settlement areas. Now, some of the different types of industries that you're gonna find in these urban areas are that of your secondary and that of your tertiary, okay? So when you think of the tertiary industry, guys, I want you to think about the Bahamas. What's our main industry that we rely so heavily on here in the Bahamas? It is also considered a tertiary industry. Could anyone assist me with that? What is our #1 industry in the Bahamas? Can I see some answers coming into the chat? Yes, tourism. Tourism. Farming is actually not a tertiary industry. Farming will be considered a primary industry, which will come under your rural areas. Okay, so our gross domestic product in the Bahamas definitely comes from tourism. So let's look at some of our settlement functions. Look at some of our settlement functions. So a function is the actual purpose in which a settlement actually serves. Okay, some of the services that a settlement can actually provide is what we will call the function of that settlement. And when you look at the function of the settlement, you want to keep some things in mind, because the function of the settlement looks at your economic activity, how you get your money, okay, how money is made, and you also want to look at your social development. When you think about the social development of a country, you want to look at education, you want to look at healthcare, you want to look at advancement of your protection, whereas your defense force and your police force, okay? So those are some of the things you want to look at when you're talking about social development in a country. So let's just quickly look at the slide that we have up. These are the different functions that a settlement actually provides, okay? We have tourist resort, also can be called tourism. Your settlement can also serve as a can provide a residential service, okay? You also have administration. You also have commercial. You also have road centers. Your settlement can also provide the function of being a manufacturing area, okay? You can also provide ports, can also serve as a cultural or religious area. Did I say mining town? Mining town can also be one, and definitely market town, okay? So just keep in mind some of these different functions that a settlement can actually provide. So we're going to do a little activity. We're going to go through them one by one. Okay, so using the previous slide, you are going to tell me which settlement function you think the characteristic is actually describing. Okay, so we're going to do them one at a time. So number one, located on coasts, river, and lakes for the movement of goods and people from land to sea. Located on coasts, river, and lakes for the movement of goods and people from land to sea. Which one of our function do you think that will fall under? Marsha says ports. Anyone else? Anthony says ports. Raven says ports. Bernardo says ports. Nathan says market. Franklin says port. Indira says port. Okay, good job, guys. All of you said port. Please give yourself a tap on the shoulder. Good job. Port is definitely the one in which we're referring to. Okay, let's do another one. Where minerals and fuels may be extracted. Where minerals and fuels may be extracted. Which function do we think that is referring to? Where minerals and fuel may be extracted. When you Marsha says mining town. Marsha, you're on the roll. Excellent job. Yes, mining town. Okay. Renato, Indira, and Nathan, also Franklin, also says mining town as well. Good job, guys. Number 3, originally used as a collecting and distribution center for surrounding farming area, consisting of agricultural crops and primary resources. So the clue is the collecting and distribution of farming goods or primary material. Okay, Marsha. Marsha, you on the roll. Marsha says market town. Anyone else? Nathan, do you have a problem with the screen? Are you able to see the screen, Nathan? If you can, please type and let me know. Okay. Bernardo says market town. Franklin says market town. Yes, everyone, you are correct. The answer is market town. Let's do another one. Number 4, where the majority of residents live but do not work. Where the majority of residents live but do not work. Okay? Yes, guys, good job. Residential it is. So in residential communities, a lot of persons travel for work. Okay, so those residential communities, these would actually be areas where persons just simply live. Okay? So number 5, attracting people for educational and religious purposes. Attracting people for educational and religious purposes. Which one do we think it is? Okay, cultural, okay. Will I see you say cultural? Religious, cultural. Okay, Franklin, excellent guys. So Franklin and Marsha and Will, cultural and religion it is. So you actually have people who travel for religious purposes. Anyone here ever heard the Vatican City in Italy? Okay, persons actually go there to actually visit the religion areas. Okay, and there are actually a few more places that are actually out there. You can also research them, look them up, where persons actually go just to serve a religious function or which provide a religious function for them. Let's do one more before we wrap up. So include spa, towns, coastal, and mountain resorts. So sorry guys, we're out of time. So remember today we looked at 2 remaining criteria of a settlement. And the 2 criteria today that we looked at was our function and our shape. Our function and our shape. Remember, the shape of our settlement refers to the way in which our buildings are actually arranged or laid out along a roadway. And our function of our settlement is the actual service in which that settlement actually provides. It was such a pleasure being here with you today. I enjoyed our interaction. Thank you so much for being cooperative. I look forward to seeing you again on this coming Friday.